this morning, our theme is witness. So we're going to talk some about that, and I'm excited to have my friend Josh with me this morning, who's going to share some of his story as part of the sermon. So whenever you want to come up, you can. You're fine. You're fine. Well, as we're getting started, I invite you to think for a moment. If you had to name one person whose life of faith has in some way inspired your own faith, who would you name and why? Someone whose faith inspired your own. Maybe it's a relative, parents, or grandparents. Maybe it's a mentor. Those are some of the folks for me. Anyone want to share someone that comes to mind of whose life has inspired your faith by just the way that they live out their faith?
Come on. Go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't see.
Yeah, Ty said his grandma. And what about?
My grandfather's whole life was based on faith.
That's beautiful.
He did everything he could to be the best Christian possible, and his grandmother was the same way. And I grew up watching her and sitting with her and going to conference with her and Stacey and learning the importance of your vision.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Anybody else have something they want to share of yeah, Martha. So she made it really real, it sounds like. Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah, Charlotte.
My mother, just the way she lived her life, and lived very humbly, and she was always committed to helping other people, particularly people less fortunate.
Yeah.
Led by me.
Yeah, so I imagine for many of us, we think of, the folks we think of, it has something to do with how they were living out their faith in the everyday, whether it's how they were treating other people and their demeanor, their way they spent their time, and doing things that made the world a better place, or just sometimes maybe we think of folks who just have integrity with all of their daily life decisions. It seems that they're putting their faith in action, and all of these things, how we treat others, how we put our faith out in action in daily life and live it out, that comprises our witness, the outward evidence, maybe we think of it as, that Jesus is somehow making a difference in our lives. And our scripture reading this morning gives us a glimpse of God at work in two people's lives, and what witness they had in the community around them. And one of these folks, that involves a dramatic change in his life, and the other kind of this consistent, steady living out what he believed to be true about God, and how that shaped his actions. And so listen to this story from Acts chapter 9, verses 26 to 31, and let's see how it relates to us. When Saul arrived in Jerusalem, he tried to join the disciples, but they were all afraid of him. They didn't believe he was really a disciple. Then Barnabas brought Saul to the apostles and told them the story about how Saul saw the Lord on the way, and that the Lord had spoken to Saul. He also told them about the confidence with which Saul had preached in the name of Jesus in Damascus. After this, Saul moved freely among the disciples in Jerusalem and was speaking with confidence in the name of the Lord. He got into debates with the Greek-speaking Jews as well, but they tried to kill him. When the family of believers learned about this, they escorted him down to Caesarea and sent him off to Tarsus. Then the church throughout Judea, Galilee, and Samaria enjoyed a time of peace. God strengthened the church, and its life was marked by reverence for the Lord. Encouraged by the Holy Spirit, the church continued to grow in numbers. Through this witness, may the Spirit inspire us to live in ways that give witness to the power of God at work in our lives, within and around us. So here in this story, we see Saul, who you may remember is also known as Paul, is one of the people who experienced God intervening in his life in a dramatic way, turns his whole life around. The opening line that we read in verse 26 speaks of all the disciples being afraid of Saul. Do y'all remember why that was, that they were afraid of him? Well, if you read at the beginning of Acts chapter 9, we see that Saul's passion for his faith, he was a Pharisee, very active in his faith, but he was not okay with the followers of Jesus, the Christians. He actually persecuted, arrested, even was there when Stephen was stoned and thought that was a good thing. And so this encounter that Saul has on the road to Damascus that Barnabas alludes to in the passage we read happened when he was traveling in order to arrest any Jesus followers he found. And as he was going down the road, he has this dramatic encounter. It says sees a bright light and hears a voice, which he identifies as Jesus, saying, "Saul, Saul, why are you harassing me?" Or it could also be translated, "Why are you hurting me?" We see there Jesus is identifying with those that Saul is persecuting and harassing. And this moment of conviction there on the road to Damascus changes Saul's life. He went from being an enemy and persecutor of the way to being on fire for preaching faith in Jesus. But it also took the bold faith of others to accept that Saul really was a changed person. Just as, maybe you've experienced this, we see someone who professes a change of life and heart, yet sometimes until we really see that evidence of that change, we might be leery that change has really happened. And so that was what was going on with the Christians in Damascus and Jerusalem. They were hesitant to believe that this person who had been hunting them down to arrest and even kill them had now become a believer. And that brings us to Barnabas. You might remember Barnabas' name was mentioned a few weeks ago. We read in Acts 4, he was a Levite from Cyprus who sold a field, gave the money to the apostles to distribute to any as they had need. And this week, we see that Barnabas was sort of Saul's in with the Jerusalem community. Barnabas was a trusted person, probably because he had such a consistent witness, faithfully living, sharing what he had, encouraging others. Acts 4 tells us that Barnabas actually was not his birth name, his government name. No, that was his nickname that meant one who encourages. And so we get the sense that Barnabas was a disciple who really walked the walk, so to speak. And we have to wonder if Saul could have done what he did if there hadn't been a Barnabas, an insider who could vouch for him, who could give him an in into the community. When we think of Saul, or as again he's often referred to, Paul, we think of him as this great witness to the faith, a missionary who goes and spreads the word, who's credited with writing many of the books that we read in the New Testament. But at one point, his being embraced by the community of believers was in question because of his past. And so as we hear this story, I wonder how your story interacts with this story of Saul and Barnabas. Maybe have you had a dramatic time? You encountered God and it somehow turned your life around with what happened with Paul? Or maybe it wasn't so dramatic, but maybe you can think of a moment in your own life when God convicted you about something that needed to change or redirected your life's path in some way. These are moments that often shape our witness. And maybe even you've had that experience of having to have folks vouch for you that, no, this guy, he's cool. This person, they're good. Come on, we can welcome them. I suspect there are also many of us who can relate to Barnabas. Maybe faith has been more of a consistent, steady thing in our lives, not quite the same dramatic flair that Saul's story has. And maybe we too can think of times that we've been able to come alongside those who maybe weren't being so easily received into the community. The sincerity or authenticity of their testimony maybe was questioned by some, but we encouraged others to see how God had been and was at work in them. So when I think of people who I think could answer yes to some of those questions, maybe all of them, I think of my friend Josh here, and again, I'm so grateful that he's with us, and Steph, who's married to Josh, and their girls. Thanks, Steph had to rearrange her work schedule for them to be able to come, so grateful for them to be with us. But I wonder, Josh, if you could start off just a little bit. Oh, yeah, thanks. If you could start off just a little bit by sharing, you had kind of a dramatic experience like Saul did, where God really intervened in your life in a pretty dramatic way. Can you give us just a little glimpse of what that was like for you, what happened?
Well, like I said, growing up, like many of y'all, my grandmother, devout believer, but I was always afraid. I knew of God, but didn't know God. But also, I sold drugs. I was a drug dealer, gang member and all that good stuff. But it kept locking me up and getting me behind bars. My Barnabas was Luke Edwards, good friend of mine, King Connolly. But I was sitting there, I didn't know how to change, didn't want to really change, because I was scared of change. You know, stepping out your comfort zone that all you knew your whole life, that's a scary feeling, you know. And Luke come in one day, it was back in 2014, 15, I was in county jail. He come in to pray with everybody, him and Ken, like they always did. And me being me, I didn't want to get out and go sit with them, pray with them, nothing like that, but I could hear them. And I was sitting there thinking to myself, Luke, you the biggest kid I've ever met, you know, goofy. But he did it with a good sense of humor, and he had a big heart. But he didn't give up on me. And so I was sitting in my cell, and I said, well, next time they come, I'm going to go out there, and I'm going to sit and talk with them, see what's up. Well, it took them about a month, maybe a month and a half. They come back in. And I sat down there, and Luke opened my eyes to a lot of things. And I'll never forget the thing he said the most that just opened my eyes, and that was, you've tried everything. Won't you try God? No. But at the same time I was saying no, I was sitting there thinking to myself, he's right. I have tried drug dealing. Where did it end me up? I've tried using drugs. Where'd I end up? I've tried running from the law. Ended up in the same spot. And and then it's like to the point where I was tired of praying on people. You know, I was ready but how do you stop once that's all you've known? And so he taught me to pray. And a friend of mine, Daniel Dickens, was in jail with me. He taught me to fast. And he said the best way to understand and, fast a little bit and see if you can't not get that. But see, I was praying for the wrong things. Help me with my case. Lord, please help me get out of this situation. Wrong things to pray for, So the longer I sat there and I fasted, I'll never forget it. I was fasting one day, and I finally just, Lord, you take it. The pressures was getting to me. I was just ready to give up all the way around. Just done with life, done with everything. And then it stuck in my ear. Just try God. So I remember I fasted all that day, and 11 o'clock at night, I'll never forget, lights out. Big light just lit up my cell. My cell was the only one lit up, it felt like. But this big warm embrace hugged me and said, I got you. And ever since then, it was like the most chilling. I still get chills because it's still there, and I don't want it to ever let go, and I know it won't. But I couldn't wait on Luke to show up the next time because I couldn't help it. But then what do you do when you get out? You're a felon. What are you going to do? You got that F on your record. You've been known to do this. You've been known to prone to violence. You've been known to hurt people. What do? How do you go about life? Nobody trusts you. You can't get a job. You can't do this. You can't do that. Luke said, I got you. I said, you're a big kid. He said, yeah, but I'm also a minister at King Street Church. I said, well, I'll be darned. So I get out. I call him. And he ended up marrying me and my wife like right after she got out, and it was fun. But still, I didn't know how to change. I was an angry person on the inside because I still didn't know how to forgive myself. But with, like I say, Luke's help, he stood up for me and opened the doors to where I could go and meet people and not have them judge me everywhere I go. And people don't realize that once you don't judge somebody and you give them that one opportunity to believe in them, that opens up a lot of anger and aggression that they did have. And that's what happened to me, was once everybody stopped judging me and actually, okay, well, let's hear what you got to say, boom. All I could do is say it now, right? Show the love that they given me. And like my grandmother, I didn't, like I said, I knew of God, but I didn't know God. Now I know God, and I don't want to give it up because it's a beautiful thing. It's a warm feeling. And I've opened up my home to people, and people's like, you're crazy. Why? Because they were needing somewhere to sleep? Well, how do you know you could trust them? I didn't. But I knew it was the right thing to do, because if Luke would have looked at me the same way I look, you know, like other people did, I would have never had that opportunity to even have a home to open my doors to. And I'll stop there. I'm just talking.
No, that's
but
great.
It's a beautiful thing, though, and that was my Barnabas, was Luke Edwards and Ken Conley, because they stood up and spoke up.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget it, and I'll never, ever let it go. Them are the two that stick out the most, Luke being the biggest, you know.
And I think that's beautiful that, you know, your life gives witness to the fact that you had these two folks, Luke and Ken, and they came alongside you and were like a Barnabas to you, like we read in the story, that kind of vouched for you, opened doors into a community where you could find acceptance. And now you and Steph are in that role for many other people, you know, not just opening your home, which is amazing, but the ways you go out and meet people where they are. And can you share just a little bit about what is that like now to be in that Barnabas role of encouraging others as they're, whether it's coming out of incarceration or
I tell people
struggling
I'm
with
nomadic.
housing?
They ask me where my church is, and I say everywhere. It don't matter. If I'm walking down the street and you want me to pray with you, I'll do it. But I'm nomadic is the way I put it, because King Street Church really don't have a specific spot, except on certain days, and that was before COVID hit. But it's I go to coffee shops. I meet up with people there. I meet people at the homeless shelter. We hang out there, and but yeah. And as far as it's being stretched, my home community didn't believe me. And I was telling Laura earlier that I was talking to my older brother, and he got pulled over by the police, you know. And they asked him, well, where's your brother at? And he said, up and boom, doing good, doing a little bit of the preaching thing, disciple thing. Really? He's like, yeah. Cop didn't want to believe it. But that's how far it can stretch. And I know it's stretched all the way past Hickory, as far as I know, because I went down there and people coming up like wanting to see if I really changed. Well, yeah. Well, what'd you do? I didn't do nothing. God done it, man. You got to realize it ain't nothing we can do. It's what God can do.
You opened yourself to that.
You got to open up. And in other words, like I say, you could keep telling, you know, I'm going to let God drive, but until you actually give up the wheel, you're going to crash every time. Yeah. I crashed more times than I care to count, but until now he's guiding it, and I can sleep over in the passenger seat. Yeah.
Well, that's a good word of encouragement too. I wonder if there's anything else you want to share as a word, as we think about not only letting God transform our lives in the way that Saul did, but how if we think about being Barnabas's.
Yeah, don't judge people. Look at it with an open mind. That's all I can say, because once you don't judge them, there's love. And once they see that love, they can either run from it or try to abuse it, but still, they know that you care. Mm-hmm. And like I say, I've had a lot of people that I wash my hands with this person or that person. I'm like, I didn't. Why? Because I know they can change. It don't matter how many times you fall down, it's how many times you can get back up, but it's always that encouragement of not judging them. Because once they feel judged, they're going to keep doing it. I mean, so that's the best way I can put it, is don't judge. Just show love. I don't care how many times. Like, what did Jesus say? 7 times 7 times 7. How many times you forgive your brother? If I did that, man, what about if he would have never forgave me? What would I be? But don't judge. I mean, Luke didn't judge me. Ken didn't judge me, and now I'm a beacon. So thank God for that, you know.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for sharing a little bit of your story with us and being here this morning. And Josh truly is one of those people, and Steph, who inspire me in the ways not only that they give witness to the power of God's work in their own life, but just that non-judgmental, constant love of so many people. So thank you.
Kid's hard, man.
Yeah.
Luke's a good kid.
Yeah. But, you know, our church, the church, big church, see, perhaps now more than ever is in need of faithful witnesses. And you all, we collectively have amazing stories to tell, stories that we've seen God turning people's lives around, lifting us up, bringing hope and renewal. And, you know, I think of how so many of you witness to God's love in sometimes subtle ways, maybe just through patience with students and young people, through listening to those going through a difficult time in their lives, through showing up for neighbors and the ways we show up for our family. And, you know, in general, especially in today's world, I like to adhere to a quote that's often attributed to St. Francis. You're probably familiar with it: preach the gospel at all times, and if necessary, use words. You heard this before? And, you know, I think Christian witness has gotten kind of a bad rap because we see so many people who equate being Christian with what they have seen in some Christians. They think maybe of hypocrisy or meanness and hatred, exclusion and
Back over there, my wife's motion.
Okay, and self-righteousness. And sometimes that leads us to want to be quiet about our faith, to not be associated with those Christians. Better just not to mention Jesus at all. But friends, I'm becoming convinced that although we should continue letting our actions and our ways of being preach the gospel, it is necessary sometimes to use words. Not in an overbearing or prideful way, but in a way that lets others see that there's a way of following Jesus that does care for those who are marginalized, those who are struggling, that it has a wide embrace that welcomes all and cares not just for humanity, but all of creation. You know, I think we here at Blackburns Chapel have that witness. There's another St. Francis quote that I love. It says, "It's no use walking anywhere to preach unless our walking is our preaching." And I believe we here at Blackburns are walking it. And I wonder if there are ways we can continue to grow in our preaching it and letting others know what's going on. And so this morning, I want to challenge us to think. What's one way maybe that we can grow in our witness to what God is doing in and through us? Is there something in our walking, our living, our faith that needs to shift or change? Or is there a way we need to be a little bolder, to speak up, to let others know that what they're witnessing isn't just, you know, someone doing a nice thing, but that we are being shaped by the one who is love?